Well, hello and welcome everyone. We're excited to have you here today for CleanTechnica's webinar, Garage Orphans and How to Support the EV Adoption Advancement in Apartment Communities. Today we're going to discuss one of the key bottlenecks in the adoption of electric vehicles around the world, and that is how someone without a garage can charge regularly, reliably, and conveniently, hence the term garage orphan. My name is Scott Cooney, and I'm the founder and former CEO of CleanTechnica. And I was a garage orphan for many years, and I chose to drive a Volkswagen biodiesel Jetta because I didn't have reliable charging for an EV. Now that I have a garage, I have a Model 3, and I love living up to CleanTechnica's slogan, which is "The future is now," because of how easy it is to drive, to charge, and to be fossil-free with solar on my roof and an EV in my garage. It feels great, and I just want to make that feeling a reality for many, many more people. So that's why we're here today. Here at CleanTechnica, our mission is to advance the clean tech revolution, plain and simple, and this webinar will hopefully push that conversation forward. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our blog as well as our YouTube channel, which you can find at cleantechnica.tv, and to our podcast, Clean Tech Talk, which you can find wherever you listen to podcasts. Today we're blessed with some great panelists who will talk about the reality of getting more EV charging to multi-family dwellings and apartment communities and their residents. I'm going to start with Sam Spofforth, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Clean Fuels Ohio and an initiative co-leader at Drive Electric USA. Sam has served as the CEO of Clean Fuels Ohio since 2002 and plays a leadership role within the Clean Cities Network. He was named the U.S. Department of Energy's National Clean Cities Coordinator of the Year in 2007 and an inductee in the Clean Cities Hall of Fame in 2011. Welcome, Sam.
Nice to be here, Scott. Thank you.
Second, we have John Riat, who is the Development Coordinator at Casto, which is a residential real estate development company. John's worked in the development and construction industry for over 10 years, playing a key role in building and managing thousands of apartment units across Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland, and his current role encompasses everything from site planning, architecture, construction, interior design, property management, which now of course includes how do we get more EV chargers to the residents of these communities. So welcome, John.
It's great to be here.
And last but not least, we have Loos, who is, has 6 years of experience in the electromobility sector in deploying and operating fast charging infrastructure in British Columbia and Canada, running utility residential smart charging programs, hardware and software interoperability testing, and consulting for fleet electrification. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you for having me, Scott.
Awesome. Well, look forward to the conversation. So I'm going to start with a question about the Drive Electric USA program. And Sam, I'd like you to educate us a little bit about what this program is and kind of dive in a little bit on the Clean Cities Network, if you'd like to start with that.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again. And yeah, the Drive Electric USA program is a interrelated multi-state initiative. It includes 14 original states. And we're working, and we anticipate building that to about 30 states or so by the end of this year. And by design, most of these states are a little less mature markets, if you will, so not as much electric vehicle adoption so far. And so the initiative, which is also funded by the U.S. Department of Energy, it's designed to really be a sort of a comprehensive state-by-state approach to what we feel are the critical pieces of pushing forward on accelerating the EV market. So those include consumer education, engaging utilities and regulators around a set of best practices for transportation electrification programs, best practices for charging infrastructure planning at all levels, educating policymakers at local, state, and federal levels, working with car dealers to help them be an accelerator rather than a deterrent to market adoption. Then finally, working to electrify fleets. So again, we will continue to build this program, but we're very excited about it. And then in terms of Clean Cities, I appreciate the question. Our organization, as you mentioned, we're a statewide nonprofit, but we're also part of a national network of so-called coalitions and it's a combination of state-based organizations like ourselves, and then some that are also locally based. It's about 80 across the country. And the real takeaway here is this Clean Cities program is focused on transportation sustainability, but it's very outcomes oriented. We're very pro EV, but we're also pro other solutions like biofuels, renewable natural gas, renewable propane, hydrogen, things like that, which we see as, you know, maybe nearer term or longer term options. You know, basically just driving towards decarbonization of our transportation system and doing it in the most economically viable way and as fast as we possibly can. So that's Clean Cities, and I'd encourage any of your listeners, just do a search for DOE or Department of Energy Clean Cities and find your local coalition and start working with them.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. It's interesting to see the states that you're working with. This is not the usual suspects of, you know, California and New York and New Jersey, the states that have traditionally been leading the charge, if you will.
Nice.
God, sorry, I've got dad jokes for days. Anyways, this is not the usual suspects of states, and it's interesting to see the adoption there. I'd love your insights into what you're seeing there versus what you've seen in some of the more pioneering states, and also the local branding, which is so critically important to making sure that engagement within those communities is very high. So I don't know if you have a few things you want to go a little bit deeper with some things you've seen in those states and some of the outcomes of the work that you've done so far.
Sure. Well, I appreciate that. Generally, it's a little bit hard to generalize across all the different states, including the states that are further along in the market. But I guess, you know, one factor would certainly be state government, and to the degree that they've taken real initiative in various states. Like, you know, you look at a state like California, places like New York, other places more on the coast, where state government's really been highly engaged for many years. And then also the utility sector, highly engaged for many years. You know, and these are critical actors in this effort. And in some other states, including some of the ones that we're working with, we're beginning to see state government become more engaged, but that's more of a recent situation. And then, you know, we're also seeing more and more of the utilities becoming engaged, but again, maybe not for as long of a time. Just sort of less market awareness, you know, kind of less understanding. And so this is why that we really felt it was important to focus on states that weren't necessarily at the head of the pack at this point, just because this kind of comprehensive approach of, you know, engaging policymakers, utilities, dealers, fleets, and then certainly educating consumers. We have what we feel is a really great approach to that. We just felt that was really important, and the initiative is gaining a lot of traction and sharing a lot of best practices.
Awesome. And where are you seeing the most sort of inroads that are making good progress? First and foremost, starting municipal level, are there companies that are particularly leading the charge? Is it yeah, I mean, maybe go a little bit into some of the successes that you've seen so far and some of the progress that seems to be being made in your early efforts. Yeah,
I mean, I'd say that certainly one category of companies, if you will, you know, across a lot of the states, you know, I refer to utilities. I mean, I think we're seeing just a lot of, you know, again, that sector is very, you know, cautious. They're very careful in terms of how they go about doing things, you know, rightly so. You know, everyone wants their lights to stay on, and you know, you sort of an inherent kind of a careful approach to new things, you know, if you will. But we're really seeing, you know, a lot of great progress. You know, a utility like Kansas City Power and Light. You know, we have states, two of our states are Kansas and Missouri, and certainly that utility, just, you know, as an example, has been great. Southern Company, Duke, AEP here, based here in Ohio. Really a lot of great, emerging leadership that we're seeing out of utilities, charging infrastructure companies in Colorado. That's maybe one of the earlier market kind of states that's in our initiative. A lot of great leadership from state government, and also a lot of great engagement from local government in Colorado. So again, I could go on, but we're really seeing some great progress, really in all these states.
Awesome. It's clear that the consumer sentiment is there and the interest is definitely there. We've talked a lot about this on CleanTechnica, that one of the biggest bottlenecks to EV adoption is the availability of chargers. That is no secret. Anybody in the industry can talk about that at some great length, and especially among what we're terming these garage orphans. So maybe John, from the real estate development background, construction and retrofitting of apartment communities, one of the things that I found really interesting in our preliminary conversations, you mentioned you had met a tenant who had an EV, and I'd love if you want to tell that story. It was please.
That's a really great story, actually. A while back, a little bit of background first is, in my development at my company, I sort of we build apartments, and some of our company is retail oriented, as well as about half and half retail and residential. And so what we've done, what I managed to do a couple years ago, we built a new apartment community, and I remember there was an incentive from a while back that helped us decide to put we put a couple of EVSE charging stations in as a resident amenity. And it was just sort of like a fluke. I've always been interested in EVs, so I kind of pushed it throughout my company, because almost half the cost to install these were paid for. So it kind of made sense at the time. So one day I was over there, this was after the whole apartment community was built up, and I was taking over my car, and I was actually going to plug in. I think I was going to have dinner or something nearby. And I remember pulling in there, and there was another guy, and I was in the middle of plugging in, and another guy had come up, plugged in his car, and we struck up a conversation. And I asked him, I said, how did you find these EV stations? And he goes, PlugShare, for obvious reasons, because it's really easy to use and everything. But then what really got me was that during this conversation, he said he actually lived at our apartment community. And I didn't catch that off at first, but then he said to me that he didn't find our apartment community searching for apartments in this location. He found the apartment community because he found the EV charging station on PlugShare and said, "Oh, look, there's an apartment community right next to this. This is an amenity. I can use this, and I can live here." And so that's just a really eye opener, that some people are actually searching for EV charging stations as an amenity for their apartments. And I think it's really, really important that we start to plan for this in the future.
That's great. So having an EV is drawing some people to the apartment communities that are pushing the envelope there, and that's great. And then other people who already live there are looking for those options as amenities. So that's neat.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing on the? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
No, I was waiting for you there.
Okay. I just wanted to touch a little bit on, so you do both the new construction side as well as the, remodeling and property management type of side. So maybe start with the new construction side and see talk a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities you're seeing in EV charging there.
So on this garage orphans topic, obviously we know that charging within your garage, if you want to have an EV, charging within your garage is the holy grail of charging infrastructure. Every day you wake up, you have either a full battery. You never have to go to the gas station, and more importantly, you don't have to go searching out a spot that could be taken when you get there. Let's say it's a couple blocks down the street and it's full. What do? You just park next to it, come back later and try it again. So typically in our company, we have a large portfolio of typically what we used to build was an apartment community with multiple buildings and all on-street parking. So parking basically parking stalls right up to the front of a building, and there'd be 15 buildings on a community and a clubhouse. Those kind of sites are prime for, and those are all existing. The only way to upgrade those things is to put in charging stations out in the parking lot, which has its own set of challenges, I think, because obviously retrofitting charging stations is extremely expensive, way more expensive than doing it ahead of time while you're under construction and planning for it. But then you have the issue is, how many do you put in for an apartment community of 200 to 400 apartment units? And then again, it gets even more complicated by who do you allow to charge it? Should it be free? Should you add cost onto someone's rent to do it? And there's a lot of considerations that go into that. What we've been doing a lot lately, and I've been trying to push for a little bit, at least in my company, something that I did in my own garage, was providing myself with a very simple way to plug in my car that's not a standard 120 volt outlet. So I think what we ended up doing is we started to incorporate garages into a couple of buildings on each of our communities. Maybe they're 3-story buildings with a garage that comes in underneath your apartment and goes directly into your apartment unit. And the beauty of that is that A, you can park right where you live. Even if you don't have an EV, that's great. But B, what I thought would be really simple and inexpensive for us to do, and it turned out it was pretty inexpensive, is you basically just run a dryer outlet from an electric panel associated with that apartment unit's electric panel or meter, put it right there. You can either do a dryer outlet or a NEMA 1450 outlet like an electric stove would use. And that's what I did in my garage at my house. And it worked great. I've used the simple mobile connector that came with the car, and I got the adapter that plugs into the outlet. And really, if you plan for that ahead of time, while you're under construction, all it takes is an extra breaker, a thicker or a heavier amperage breaker, some heavier gauge wire, a junction box, and an outlet cover, an outlet. And there's no smarts about it. There's no, one of the things that we have that I have had as a challenge, and I manage these 2 charging stations over at our apartment community that we put in as an outdoor amenity, charging amenity. They require an internet connection. They require a cell network and a monthly subscription for that to work, which is all great. And you have a ton of control over your charging station. Who plugs in there, how much it costs, and all this stuff. But I think when it comes down to it, the ultimate way is just finding something simple that doesn't require internet connection right into your garage. And if you can do that, we've been pushing for that a little bit, and we've done that for a few garages at each of our new communities going forward. And it, I think, is the easiest way to get charging infrastructure into an apartment community if you are building garages.
And so that's, I think somebody referred to this as the Holy Grail, is to have a garage with, a 220 line, and that's kind of the ideal for people to have an EV in an apartment community. What about the retrofitting? That's the more challenging sort of side of this.
So there's there's obviously other retrofitting options. So like if you have a community with no parking garages, but you just have surface level parking, the ideal way there is to find some areas nearby, an electrical transformer, and you can work with, as Sam was saying, if you can work with your local electric company or the municipality or something to get high power from those electrical boxes versus trying to go off an apartment community's house panel. There's always, I think, more capacity near an electrical transformer. But when you go put those in, you are now digging up grass, landscape, sidewalks. There are other options, I think, but there are some limited ones. I mean, if you have light poles out in the middle of a parking lot, which a lot of big, obviously like commercial shopping centers have light poles. A study can be done easily to see if that pole could support 1 or 2 plugs for 30 amps each, I think would be plenty. And again, there's a number of creative ways to go about it. None of them are really cheap. None of them retrofitting options are cheap. And I have had, and so the biggest issue I think I've noticed, at least within the real estate development industry so far, is there's this transition period of, hey, this costs a lot of money, but what do I get from it? As the investors and whatnot, what kind of return can I get? And it's always kind of a double-edged sword. If you want to give it as an amenity, you might want to let it be free for your apartment residents and charge only for outside public use. And then again, who do you let do it is the thing. Do you just let it be your residents or let public use? So that's been the hardest thing, is saying, hey, I think we need this. There's been a lot of demand and a lot of interest in EVs at our apartment communities. Can we have an estimate done to put in 4 ports or 6 or 8? And then again, also there's the return on your investment there. It costs about the same to put in 2 charging ports as it does for 4 or 6 once you've got the power there. So it always makes sense to do more, in my opinion. And I think the hardest part for me has just been to explain that this is an amenity that people want, that they need, and that this revolution is coming. Don't worry about the return on your investment immediately. It will come eventually, because as you can see, a number of automakers have already committed to having huge fleets of EVs only. I think Volvo mentioned that they were going to phase out their gasoline research and development at some point. It's coming, and as when there are thousands and thousands of apartment communities that have no infrastructure, even spending the money now to put in those charging stations, at least a few of them, will give you return on investment. Here, I don't know how many years, but a few or a couple, it doesn't matter. It's going to become a good thing for people to seek out your apartments, seek out your shopping center or your retail center at all. So I really think that if you can just convince and use a little bit of education, and there's also a lot of talk about education, which we can go to later, but I'll just talk forever if I keep going here.
It's an exciting topic. I mean, I get really excited about this stuff too. So it's easy to go down these rabbit holes of how awesome this is. So for sure agree on that. And it's such an interesting topic in regard to the amenity and the return on investment and that sort of thing. So maybe Matt, I'd love to have you chime in a little bit. Your company Flow shared with us some incredible statistics around shopping centers and dwell time and all the benefits to shopping communities of having EV charging infrastructure in their parking lots. And that includes bringing out of town shoppers and people who wouldn't normally come to that particular shopping center, increasing the amount of time that they're hanging out and shopping, which is of course is great return on investment for the shopping center itself. Similarly for apartment communities, as John said, you're going to start attracting, nice high-end customers who want to have EV charging infrastructure and will increasingly view it not as an amenity, but as a necessity going forward. So maybe Matt, I'd love to have you talk a little bit to some of the developments you're seeing there and, some of the pros and cons and some of the remaining obstacles that exist in that infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very important point. And I think one thing we're still learning and discovering is by having those connected chargers, we get access to a lot of data on how it is utilized and how we can optimize the development of future infrastructure and how the behavior changes of the drivers with the technology of the vehicle that evolves. Like 10 years ago, the Nissan Leaf was there with a small battery pack. We were seeing more and more bigger battery pack coming into these vehicles. So we see a change in the charging behaviors as well on those commercial facilities. And the data aspect is again quite interesting, as you were saying, because the charger is connected, the EV drivers always has kind of a connection with his vehicles and the state of charge of his vehicle. If it's you don't need to be next to your vehicle to know that. You can see, continue shopping or continue do your errands and see, oh, maybe I still need like 20 minutes, so I'll go get a coffee and just wait 20 more minutes. And this is all the data we can also provide to the operator of those charging stations to kind of optimize, okay, well, this is how you can generate more revenue, not necessarily with the charging station, but outside of the charging stations.
Very cool. Yeah, and I think in terms of the return on investment, like John was talking about, it seems very clear, and from some of the data that Flo shared with us before, the payback, the return on investment for installing this stuff is very clear, and the payback periods seem to be pretty short, even with some of these softer metrics that are hard to actually put a dollar figure to, like amenity kind of thing, to attract and retain good tenants and to bring out of town shoppers and that sort of thing. So it seems pretty clear. Can you talk a little bit to that payback period and the return on investment that apartment communities as well as shopping centers can get by installing the type of hardware and software that you guys have at Flow?
There's been exactly. There's been many questions about this, and for example, the question we have often, how much should I charge for the charge, like per minute or per kilowatt hours? And by having the data, we can do some experiment, like you can charge $1 or $2 per hour and see how it will affect the behavior on how long the drivers will stay for the charge and what they will do outside of that. So that's one aspect on kind of the direct revenue you can generate and the indirect revenue you can generate thanks to the data we collect. Another aspect is more on the control of a fleet of charging station. Usually you start with 1-2 charging station, but then you want to expand your fleet and attract more and more EV drivers as the rate of adoptions of EVs grows. And that's where John was mentioning the cost of installation, and that's where the total cost of ownership is getting quite important, where you want to minimize your capital cost to install the charging station. So for this, you can have some software intelligence that will manage the charge rate and the power consumption of those charging stations in order to minimize the impact on the electrical infrastructure that you have. Though you want one charging station to charge relatively fast at certain moment of the day, but on average, you want that the power of this charging station can be relatively low, especially that in communities where people come back at home after work or after their sport events or whatever, they plug in overnight, and then the vehicles, usually from the data we've seen, needs about, it depends, like 1 hour to 3-4 hours of charging, but it stays plugged in for 10 hours during the whole night. So there's really a lot of opportunities and intelligence you can develop to minimize the capital cost there. The second aspect is really on the operational cost, where in some utilities territories, there's different rates depending on the time of the day, and you can program or schedule the charging stations to start the charge and minimize this while keeping the same user experience for the EV drivers, which is also an important aspect. You don't want this to be something they need to think about, really. That all the EV drivers want is have the vehicles charge sufficiently so they can do what they have planned for the rest of their day or the week.
Yeah, and this is a really good point. The time of use charging is critical. Obviously, we don't want to be putting a lot of demand on the grid during peak use times, which is typically when people get home from work, they plug in their car, they go inside, they start cooking, watching TV, all the things. peak demand is one of the primary reasons why coal and natural gas still have quite a bit of a foothold, because the peaker plants that are fired up between 5 and 10 p.m. have to be pretty quick, on-demand energy that is reliable baseload type of energy. And so a lot of utilities have traditionally created peaker plants that are natural gas and coal, because it checks all those boxes. So if we could talk a little bit about that peak demand kind of time frame, and Sam, maybe this is something that in your ecosystem, what have you seen? What are the conversations around this peak demand time, and how there are what are the options for kind of getting around this as an issue?
Yeah, well, first, I would certainly agree with Matt that, and you, Scott, that the time of charge or time of use, that there needs to be different rates that people have the opportunity to pay based upon the time of day to help drive more of that charging to the off-peak times. And this is really what kind of comes back and helps to make, is sort of part of why that having access to charging at home, whether you park on the street, have access based upon charging at the curbside at a light pole or a utility pole or something like that, or in a parking lot. Hopefully it's a garage, because surface lots, they have a lot of different problems. Sort of don't get me started on my attitude about surface parking lots, but one of the challenges that John mentioned is that they're a lot more difficult to retrofit to electrify the parking spaces of these lots. But it's really important, and it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all kind of answer here, but I think from a public policy standpoint, it's very important to encourage and maybe even get to a point of requiring utilities to invest customer dollars in the infrastructure on site, in the parking lots, in the garages, et cetera, on the street, et cetera. Not necessarily the charging units themselves, but the wiring that's necessary to bring the power from the transformer or wherever it's coming from to that outlet, to make the investments now, so we can be in a position to electrify these parking spaces as the demand grows. Because if we don't do that, and if we say like, well, it'll be fine for people who live in apartments and condos to just stop at a local fast charging station and get a charge, late in the afternoon or something as they're going home, that's a recipe for a lot more expense for the grid, because we're going to have to build out that capacity. One of the great value propositions, kind of this is at the intersection of two really strong parts of the value proposition for electric vehicles. One is for the consumer to be able to conveniently plug in at home, and it's also the cheapest way to get the charge that you need.
Yeah.
And then for the overall utility customer base, if we can drive charging and this increased load from charging onto these off-peak times, then everybody wins in terms of customers, regardless of whether you own an EV or not. Your electric rates are being driven down, and that's a win for the grid. And we can't get that win for the grid if everyone's stopping at a fast charging station and plugging in at 5 p.m.
Yeah, I would also argue that not only is it a challenge for the grid, but if people are DC fast charging often, that further wears batteries down, lithium-ion batteries down, as evidence of many cycles of really fast DC fast charging can reduce the capacity of your battery over time. So I'd say that actually is not good for a sustainable future if you're constantly having to replace batteries, such as some of these taxi networks or other networks that just rely on DC fast charging.
There's definitely a role for level 1 charging to be a sustainable use case type of thing. I mean, it's especially for people who don't drive a lot or who have a pretty short commute during the day. Plugging in overnight on a level 1 will take care of all your daily charging needs. So there's definitely a role for that, and I'd love seeing all the development and innovation in this space to see, you know, how people are addressing these level 1, level 2 peak demand times. It's super fascinating. Matt, I want to get back a little bit to you know, the work with utilities, because we're touching on this right now. And so, you know, maybe Sam and Matt in particular, if you want to chime in on this one, you know, one of the utilities you mentioned earlier, Sam, is Duke Energy, and that Duke has been in the past very open about their commitment to being a good citizen, to trying to lead the future, get to a sustainable future. However, their business model historically was built on coal, and they're one of the top, I think, 3 carbon emitters in the United States. This is definitively in Drive Electric USA's service area. So it's, you know, maybe if you can talk a little bit to the relationship there, and what you're seeing from somebody who has talked openly about doing this and is really trying to push towards it, and faces all those problems about peak demand, you know, delivery between 5 and 10 p.m., and trying to change an entire business model. I'm super fascinated by this, and at that utility scale, this is where change really is gonna be huge.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, you know, Duke is an example of a utility. I mentioned them earlier, that they have embraced transportation and electrification in many different ways. And, you know, one of the, you know, values that we see for electric vehicles and transportation electrification is how well that EVs pair with renewable energy, because you know, largely because of the intermittent nature of electric vehicle charging. You know, you don't need to have this. It's not like, you know, an air conditioner that needs to be running all the time, or a TV or something like that, where you know, when you want to, you know, have it, you've got to have the power for it. Electric vehicles are often the kind of load that can shift into these periods where there's more, you know, renewable power on the grid. That being said, EVs are also a good fit for a heavy coal-using utility. You know, because of this overnight kind of base load, you have the spinning reserves of coal plants just, you know, providing power during the night, you know, whatever, and EVs can charge then. So there's no inherent conflict, at least today, you know, between these utilities like Duke that are very heavy into coal still. But over the longer term, I mean, the grid is going to get cleaner and cleaner. We're going to see less and less coal and more renewables, and those are just market fundamentals, you know, that are just you know, providing market advantage to solar, to wind, rather than coal. And so we're going to see those trends, and it's important that we continue to encourage utilities like Duke to evolve and, you know, replace with renewables. But there's no barrier based upon the fact that there's no barrier to electric vehicles based upon the fact that they're coal dependent now.
Right. Okay, great. And Matt, so we got a question from one of our participants, Troy Moon. Thanks for the question. And I forgot to mention there's a Q&A box. Please, if you have a question for one of our panelists or for the whole community of panelists, please post it into the Q&A box. We are monitoring that. So we got a good question from Troy Moon here, and I'm going to direct this one to Matt about utilities. And so Sam touched a little bit there on Duke. I feel like Flo, you work across the United States and Canada, implementing electric vehicle systems, infrastructure, hardware, and software solutions, and you work with a lot of utilities. What else are you noticing with regard to utilities? Are they being prodded by regulators? Has Flo engaged with PUCs to start helping move towards this EV program transition? Maybe you can talk a little bit to that ecosystem.
Yeah, sure. So we've run a bunch of demonstration programs with the utility. I think there are very, very different aspects and different services than that electric vehicles can provide. The fundamental thing is, as I was saying, and Sam was saying as well, electric vehicles is a very flexible load because it's plugged in for a long time compared to the time it needs to charge. So you can kind of control it without degrading the experience for the EV drivers. So depending on the type of utilities and the type of generation used, the energy used to generate the electricity, the needs are a bit different. So if you're in a very carbon intense utility where you use coal or natural gas, you may want to leverage the flexibility of electric vehicles to integrate more renewable energies to try to limit the marginal CO2 production that you will do by increasing the production on your coal power plants. You want to keep your coal power plants to kind of a minimum as a spinning reserve, as Sam was explaining. But we're also seeing clean utilities that run primarily on hydro, like in British Columbia or in Quebec, where they see the opportunity on the energy market to, when the price of electricity is low, they can use the flexibility of electric vehicles to charge the vehicles, and then when the electricity is high outside, they can sell the electricity to other states to make a profit. That's one aspect. Another aspect is not on the productions, but on the power system itself. You have transformers, power lines. They all have power limits. Of course, they can take as much as current as they're designed to. And in some communities, well, you have lots of EV penetration. Like we see usually wealthy neighborhood, like one person will buy an expensive EV, and then the other neighbor will buy another EVs, and they kind of spread geographically that way. So it stresses the grid locally. But as I was saying, it will just create a small peak demand by the end of the day when everyone's plugged in. So you can leverage, mitigate this peak, and don't have the necessity to upgrade your transformer. So that's quite interesting for utilities there, because they can increase the utilization of their assets. So basically reducing the marginal cost of electricity there, which is quite interesting, because by using EVs, you increase the utilization of energy, but in the end, you end up decreasing the cost of electricity, because you don't need to have this much capital installed for your grid. So the different use cases, as we're seeing, yeah.
And as vehicle to grid V2G technology becomes even better, you can look at electric vehicles as a distributed network of batteries that the utility can put some energy out into the grid and store during times when they have excess, especially renewables, and then pull back as needed, and potentially use those cars and incentivize the car owners as a way to distribute energy across the grid, which is, as I said, the future is now, and it's looking pretty fun.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of the different use cases you can try with V2Gs. We've seen by just delaying the charging of the vehicle, so what we call V1G, because it goes into one direction. There's already a lot you can do. But as I was saying, it's often demonstrations or pilot programs at this stage, where we demonstrate the technology, we have proved that it works, it can be efficient, but it will all come with scales. Like when we have a lot of EVs in place, there's a lot of opportunities that the utilities can use for this.
One of the things that first caught my eye about Flow was the innovation you guys did with streetlights, which was so very cool. And I'd love if we can pull up that picture, and maybe you can talk to that a little bit. The conversion of streetlights, which are using a lot of wattage, to LEDs, which don't use a lot of wattage, freeing up a lot of electrical capacity that then you guys figured out can plug your car in. Pretty neat stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So this comes from an EV driver who posted on PlugShare. It's always great to see our hardware and our equipment in the wild, but Yeah, at Flow, we believe that the experience of owning an EV should be better than owning a gasoline car or diesel vehicles anyway, regardless of you have access to a private charger or not. And municipalities play a critical role here, because those garage orphans are often in big cities, and by finding locations where people have to go anyways, and by chances they can plug in their EVs and run their errands, and then when they come back have a free charge EV. That's how we believe we can make the experience better than a gasoline vehicles. So in this particular situation, I really like this location, because we had a bunch of different constraints when we work with municipalities. There's first the design, where there's some kind of cultural heritage. Sometimes here, this is a kind of a Victorian style light pole, and we had to integrate this to make sure it does not look ugly. But also outside of the design, there's the whole experience and safety issues. So you see there's a cable management system on the light pole as well. So to make sure that the cable does not fall on the ground and on the sidewalk and nobody trips. It's relatively low as well. So you can use RFID cards to tap, and you can be in a wheelchair without any issues, or chargers are also connected. So you can use the mobile app quite conveniently to access the charging station. So those are kind of some of the design aspects where we work with each municipalities and try to make sure that we fit into the environment and the culture of where we're deploying our charging stations. The other aspect is really the reliability and the robustness of the charging station, right? Because they're in cities sometimes. People who will rely on those charging stations needs to make sure that they're reliable and they will be always available. And if they're not, that at least they can see it beforehand through an application that the station is out of service. So this is another aspect that we're working out very hard to make sure as a mobility provider, we provide the customer with the most available information.
Awesome. And pilot programs across the US and Canada are proving these programs work and can be replicated, and that is exactly what we need to be doing. We have a great question here that kind of touches on that a little bit. So Matt, if you want to continue with this. Francois Lalonde, apologies if I mispronounced that. Does Flow have a technology that limits the charging load in real time below the limit of the supply system of a condo or apartment building?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was mentioning with the limitation of the capital cost. We have a power sharing technology and power limiting technology where the charging station will kind of communicate all together in order to limit to a certain total power that's either the power of the electrical installation, or even with the building, you want maybe to limit your overall peak demand, because as a commercial building, you have to pay for the energy, but you also have to pay for the power demand that you're using every month. So sometimes we want to synchronize with, I don't know if there's a kitchen and elevators and all of those things that are using a lot of demand, make sure we don't charge the vehicle at this time, so we can integrate with the whole system and be holistic on how we not provide a local optimal of the solution, but really a global optimal of the whole electricity installation.
Awesome. Good questions coming in, guys. We have 10 minutes or so left, so anybody viewing, listening, please continue to send questions in. Got another question here, probably best for Sam. Would you say that, can you talk a little bit about charging stations in cold weather climates? Obviously, some of the states you work in are very, have some harsh winters. What kind of challenges exist, and how does charging infrastructure work in harsh winters?
Yeah, in terms of the charging station itself, aside from some kind of a big ice storm event, that, you might see a nozzle frozen to a pedestal or something like that, there really aren't any issues in terms of charging a vehicle in cold weather. There are issues in terms of battery degradation and range. Not so much degradation, but just limitations on range, because in a very cold situation, running the electric heater in a fully electric vehicle is going to draw the battery down faster than if you were in a warm environment. Not running the heater and air conditioning also draws the battery down, but not at the same rate that heating the interior of a car is going to. So really, generally, I mean, these charging stations are very durable, very robust. They're going to operate just fine in a cold weather situation, unless they get frozen stuck to the pedestal. But the batteries are what there's a little bit less range.
Got it. Okay. Great. John, I wanted to come to you with the next question. We got one here. The question here is, does anyone know about any utility turnkey installation and managing programs in North America, specifically for apartment communities? And so as you work in that space, what have you found?
As in terms of turnkey solutions to all this, there have been a couple. We actually had a few give us a couple of quotes to install some turnkey solutions where all we had to do was provide the parking space and a place to pull power from, essentially. And always in those situations, the goal was to find the closest location to the power and the most convenient centralized location, especially on an apartment community. We have found a few of those. I've gotten a number of quotes and different installations that people were proposing. Unfortunately, we never, except for the 2 stations that I put at the one apartment community in downtown Columbus that we installed, I haven't been able to go forward with any of these, especially as COVID had hit. That put a damper on more important things. But it always comes down to cost and return on investment, and that has unfortunately been the hardest part. But there are some turnkey solutions, not only for parking lots, but also for your own home as well. A lot of electricians will quote you to come in and retrofit and put either a plug or a EVSE in your garage for you. Sometimes they may need to upgrade your electrical service to your house, but more times, if your house is built in the last 30 years, generally you probably don't need to. But yeah, there are a couple out there. I don't know if any off the top of my head right now, but there are some turnkey solution products out there that will come to, and all you got to do is give them the space, tell them where to do it.
Right on. I imagine we'll see more come on the market as the need is obviously clear and there is obviously a market for it. So I'm sure we'll see more development in that space. Okay, great. Want to get to one more question here from Oz. Thank you, Oz. What kind of connectors and stations are in more demand? He says, I hear about SAE and Chadomo. Of course, Tesla. Do we expect a unified solution at some point? Whoever wants to handle that one.
I think Chadomo is going to go away. I don't see very many Chadomo stations, but I do see plenty of the CCS plugs, and that one seems to be, which is essentially the J1772 plug with 2 DC lugs on it, and I think that's probably going to end up being the standard. Although the Tesla connector is extremely pretty and user friendly, it's going down the same road as proprietary plug-in as some other companies out there. So I don't know. Honestly, I think the combo CCS combo is going to be the one to go for.
Sam, what do you think?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think, it's hard to say, how long this will take. And it may be something that's kind of depending on what part of the country, what part of the world that you're living in and what the market is. But it may take a while, but I would agree with John that the CCS combo probably has the best shot of being more of a universal. And we would love to see that, to be honest, because it's just from a customer user experience standpoint, it's just a whole lot easier to deal with one type of plug.
Yeah, just like a gas station.
Right.
Matt, any other comments there?
Yeah, no, same for us. We love that the industry would agree on just one standard. It would make things easier for us as well. And yeah, Chadomo, well, I think now more and more networks are abandoning this technology. So it's looking like a bright future for CCS. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, guys, thank you very much. I want to thank our panelists for today, Sam Spofforth from Clean Fuels Ohio, CEO and initiative co-leader at Drive Electric USA, which you can find at driveelectricusa.org. I apologize, Sam.
I think it's .org, but it might, you can try .com too. Just do a search.
Oh, it is driveelectricusa.org. Sorry, I had it pulled up in another tab. Great. And then John Riat, development coordinator at Casto, a residential real estate development company. You can find them at castoinfo.com. And Matt Loos from Flow, the senior technical advisor there. You can find more information about Flow at flo.com. And any final words from panelists about this conversation before we wrap up?
One more comment that I like to make. We didn't really get into this, but I think it's really important as we look at charging anywhere, whether it's DC fast, public, or residential, or whatever, that we really look at this from an equity lens standpoint. There's a lot of neighborhoods and communities that have this sort of been disinvested in historically, also rural communities for that matter. It's really important to be mindful, again, from a public policy standpoint, that we give everyone access to all the benefits from transportation electrification as we go forward.
Yeah.
Agreed. Awesome. Thank you very much to everybody. And for all of our listeners and watchers out there, we will be posting this video on CleanTechnica within the next week or so. So keep an eye out for that as a recap. And we'll be doing a summary article as well to follow up on it. So thanks everybody. This is an important and very critical conversation as we move towards a clean energy future. So thanks to everybody for all your hard work in this arena, and let's keep it rolling. See you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.